Welcome to Three Witches and a Druid podcast, a Canadian podcast about paganism in today's modern society.
Hello again, and welcome back to Three Witches and a Druid, where normally we're sitting around the kitchen table, but now because of more lockdowns happening in Nova Scotia, we are doing this on Zoom.
So there may be some breakup and interruptions, like I just interrupted Margot.
So the topic we are discussing on this episode is coming out of the broom closet. I am Margot.
And I am Maeve.
Gwen.
And I'm Brian.
And one more disclaimer that we might all talk over each other by accident because we're on Zoom.
As we said before, it's hard without the physical cues. So coming out of the broom closet, how is that for everybody? Just to clarify before we get into this, luckily I'm in a different household, but I believe I'm easily the youngest of us.
Yes.
Likely, yes.
Not decades. So when we discuss this, we have to remember the difference between coming out of the broom closet back when you guys came out versus people nowadays.
Well, then let's make it clear to start then. Brian, when did you realize you're pagan?
About 20 years ago.
About 20 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. When did you guys come out?
So I was 86, so that's over 30 years ago now. Yeah.
Did you come out then or just start practicing then?
The first thing I did, and this is interesting. So although my parents supported we were rural, although they supported the local church, which was a United Church, which is a very progressive Protestant church, it was more of an academic exercise for them and also community building. And then on top of that, I got interested, I guess, in religion and culture because that was my mother's major. She was a school teacher who went back to school. She became a school teacher when all you needed was a teaching certificate. And then she went back to school and got her university while I was still living at home, and I would have been middle school age. And she got her BA, and her study was, she had a double major, religion and culture and history. So those were the kind of conversations and discussions, and some, depending on what course mom was at, she was at Hindu temple or she was here or there. And we always had these fascinating philosophical and theological dinner table discussions. Beyond being a seeker, I also had this sort of background of looking at things that way. And actually, while I was in university studying, we ended up having one class together, which having your mother be the smartest person in your university classes, you just make friends hand over fist, let me tell you. Anyway, I phoned them up when I found the Sybil Leek book. I phoned up my mom and said, I just found this book and it just resonates so well. And I wanted to read things. She's like, I know Sybil Leek. I read her stuff. I'm like, you read her stuff? Why did I not know this? How did I not know this? It was more a case of, oh, what's Gwen going to do now? They literally said, does this mean you're going to start dancing naked around the full moon? And I said, well, I could, but it's not in the immediate plan sort of thing. I didn't have community. It was just me. I didn't have access to any other books, even through the university library. Like, the books were not great. My husband and children and I, we moved up north. And so I was reading mythology books and history books and not coming out to people at work because that really, I wanted to not just keep my job, but progress in my work. Yeah, I had many, many years before I was out within the community, and I had to move to Halifax to do that. And I credit the UU Church for being a big part of making that a possibility.
Coolio. Margot?
Well, I had probably an easier time coming out because I started working at Little Mysteries. So it was kind of a given. I didn't really have to come out to anyone because I was there in the middle of it all, working at the Pagan bookstore. And I was not shy about it. And being right downtown in Halifax and being somewhat of a flamboyant looking character, I mean, everybody downtown knew that I worked at the witch store. Anytime the media came around, usually Halloween, and wanted to do an interview for the paper or radio, I was often the person that spoke to them and got interviewed or got photographed. So I remember actually when I was in the Fringe Festival festival with Linda's belly dancing group. And we were in the newspaper for that. And I was like, oh, my mom will be so excited. I'm in the paper for something other than being a witch. Because most of the articles that got cut out and sent to her had something to do with me being pagan and the pagan community in general. So
Very good. Very good.
you know, any job I've had since, I've never felt the need to be in the closet or hide it. But again, because it is a much more understood and accepted path now than it used to be. Even now, the little suburban mall that I work at now, the number of people there who are excited about the podcast and who listen to the podcast and who relate to it, it's like pagans are everywhere.
We are. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Anyone who recognizes that reference. Mine had several different sides to it. My parents, fairly receptive people. My father's very much an academic, and my mother is reasonably easygoing. At first, it was like, "You're doing what?" That's my dad. "You're what?" When I sat down with my mother, I explained it to her and what it was. She went, "Wait a minute. I guess I know where you get it from," because her family was very much that now. It skipped her. My mother is a true Christian woman, and for all my great-grandmother cleaned the church every week, she was as big a witch as ever breathed. My mother's father was a pagan, and so once I put a name to it, she says, "Well, my grandmother and my father." She was quite accepting. My father just was like, once said to me, "How did I get such a weird kid?" I said, "You ever looked in the mirror?" I said, "You can't raise us to be free thinking and all of that and then get annoyed when we're free thinking." And he says, "Yeah, I know." But my parents were quite accepting. Now, you know, like I had one set of grandparents that would not have understood. I was, you know, Satan's harlot. My brother outed me.
Oh, no.
It took a lot. We just didn't talk about it. And at work, I was fairly open, thinking, oh, this is an enlightened age. I kind of learned the hard way to shut up. Sometimes you're around people, very educated, knowledgeable people, that kind of idea, who still were like very non-accepting. So I learned to be more quiet about it. I kind of learned the hard way, because to me, it's like, oh yeah, this is great. This is what we're doing. And it turns out once I started talking to my sister, she's like, oh, for heaven's sakes, that's exactly what I think. It's in the family. Recent years, there's no need really to hide. So out there, and like, you know, back when the media and the police and gawkers were on the commons looking at a ritual, now no one bats an eyelash when they see something like that go on. It is much different. But my coming out was myriad. I learned the hard way at work to keep my mouth shut. And even, say, my daughter is 18, so 13 years ago when she went off to school, even 13 years ago, you know, that's a private family thing. We don't talk about that, you know, so much to other people. I was very concerned that she might get a little bit of, you know, a little ostracized. And, well, you're not allowed over to their house because, you know, they're witches or something like that. So I did find I was careful 25, 30, even 15 years ago when she started school, 13 years ago. But now, like, who cares? People may care, but whatever.
Yeah.
Not a deal at all.
When Atticus started going to school, we told his teacher, like, yeah, we're pagan. Not a big deal.
Be prepared for something that might come out of his mouth. Now, we
Yeah.
all know a story of a single mother.
Thinking that.
Yeah. So gets a call from the school, I guess. And this isn't yesterday. This is like 15 years ago, I would assume, or whatever. And her child they were talking, I think, about Christmas in the Christmas story. And she just was not getting it. And finally she said, "Who's God? Is he like the goddess's boyfriend?" She didn't have a God. Didn't know what to do with that God word. The teacher learned, you know, good. They got outed at school, and that's often when you have kids. You got to be prepared for that. Kids don't have that filter, right?
No.
I remember that now. Is he the goddess's boyfriend?
Yeah.
So when the conversation eventually came up with my parents, I think it was just me and my mom in the car. My parents were never religious. It was just never a conversation they even cared about. I don't remember what got us on the topic, and she had asked, like, well, do you believe in God? And I said, well, I'm a pagan. And she got really quiet, bit of a concern on her face, and she looked at me and said, is that what Tom Cruise believes in? And I said, no, that's not what Tom Cruise believes in. And she's like, okay, as long as it's not that, you do whatever you want.
Good for her.
Once I assured them all this, they practice sacrifices and babies, and so I got that through their head. and again, talked about it. And my mother said, oh my God, this is so in my family. So, but no.
I think if someone had sat my great grandmother down and explained to her what paganism was, she would have been a kitchen witch.
Yeah.
Like, no one in my family was Catholic or religious in any sense. And my great grandmother had a monkey and she had a chicken in the house. And yeah, she was a bit of an eclectic lady.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I took my mother to a summer solstice ritual. One of the first rituals, it was a long time ago, it was one of the first rituals I ever led. My mother came and I dressed her up all properly and all of that. And afterwards she says, would my grandmother have gotten this? I'd say this, my grandmother would have really gotten this. And I thought, okay, well, that's good.
Yeah. All my family and all Karen's family, when we got married, we had a hand fasting. They all experienced that. So they all seemed like, oh, this all seems perfectly fine. Minus the plastic lays, everything was fine. We had two friends be ushers, and they were kind of practical joker jerks. And while Karen was getting ready, they passed out plastic lays to everybody. And when everybody asked, like, what's this for? And they kept, it's a pagan thing, just do it. So when Karen came out, everybody's wearing these plastic lays, and she kind of stopped and laughed and said, what are you people doing? And they're like, they told us to wear them. It was some sort of weird pagan tradition.
That's kind of cute. Actually, if you go to, and I've been to more than one traditional Anglican ceremony, they do take the cloth and wrap it around the hands of the two people. They do the hand fasting.
Yeah.
And even I'm originally from the Valley, even into the 20th century, in Baptist ceremonies, they jumped the broom.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. They still did, and I grew up, I learned to dance the maypole in elementary school.
We did the maypole in elementary school too.
These things were still around. So the remnants of it are still there.
So one thing that we can definitely, that's a point of interest for us, is that we all live in the city, and coming out of the closet in the city is much, much different than coming out of the closet in, say, the Valley.
I bet.
Yeah. There are still a lot of pagans who feel like they need to be secretive of who they are and what they believe. It's 2020. Things are changing. Acceptance of various spiritual beliefs and religions it's commonplace now. If you end up facing against someone who is anti your beliefs, that's a problem. And that's a problem like on a grander scale than you may think.
It is.
So when I was first being oriented like 5-6 years ago now, I can't even remember, into the prison system, the federal prisons are also used as an economic tool in a sense. They're placed in rural areas to give employment opportunities, right, in rural areas. So we often find federal prisons in more remote areas. So I was in Western Nova Scotia and being oriented to the institution there and introduced around. And I did have a guard, when he realized what my position was, turn his back on me.
Really?
And the on-site chaplains looked at me and looked at him. I'm not there to convert. We don't proselytize. I don't care what his beliefs are. And he didn't hurt my feelings. But the on-site chaplain, kind of needled him. And he said, I don't talk to Satanists.
Ah, yes.
Well, and that's always that lovely little misconception. It's like,
Exactly.
that's a whole different spirituality, which you were not a part of.
Exactly. And trying to explain that to somebody who, that's not their view. And so they were not very receptive. And all I could do was keep going in and do my job. And, some people will never be your friend.
No.
And some people will never, not that I need them to be accepting necessarily of me or whatever, but definitely they have to be professional in their job and deal with the men professionally. And I was hearing stories that some of the guards were not open to their faith. And you have to, run that through your personal filter, because this is a population of people that feel somewhat put upon and they have zero power. So they think people are picking on them. And so I wasn't going to jump all over anything, but I thought, well, now I know that there's some truth to this, that it's hard for some people, even when they're paid to be professional and open-minded. Things referring to faith, that can really hook into people and trigger them and stuff. So you still have to be a little bit careful, I think, certainly in rural areas, but also just people for whom faith is very important, depending on their faith strain, that it's hard for them to be accepting of alternative beliefs like this.
Of course, yeah. Like, we understand that the four of us come from a point of privilege. Like, we live in a city that's very accepting and opening.
Yeah.
In all honesty, part of it is Halifax has a very long history in paganism. We have strong community.
Mhm.
So it's not an issue here between Little Mysteries and the neighborhood witch and all sorts of pagan business going on in the city. We don't have an issue here, where in the valley or on the South Shore or even the North Shore, it's a bigger deal.
Yeah. Yes, we're very lucky.
I have more than once had people think I was a Satanist.
Mhm.
I've had that happen more than once. You're a witch? Oh my God, you're, Satan, and on and on. And my answer is no, I'm terribly sorry. Satan is a Christian deity, and I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
My religion in one form or another predates yours by 30, 40, 50,000 years. Sorry, the pagan concepts. So when they say, what do you mean he's a Christian, he's a Christian deity? I said, no, he is. Satan gets a lot of play in Christianity, and I'm not a Christian. Oh, sorry. That has been interesting. I've had that more than once.
I've only been aware, I think, once of being thought a Satanist was when Gwen was still the property manager here.
Oh.
And somebody happened to mention that after being in my apartment to fix something, thought that I was a Satanist or something.
That's right, eh? And then they decided, no, you were just artistic.
Yes.
Lovably eclectic is what I like.
But I know my mom was never really comfortable with the idea of me being pagan. So about 10 years ago when it would have been, was she still living in Winnipeg? I'm trying to remember. No, I think we were both there to visit friends. And I went out for coffee with her and a bunch of her friends from Winnipeg. And they were asking me what I was doing. And I was at Little Mysteries at this point. So I was sort of couching my language because I didn't want to upset my mom. So I would say things like, I'm working in a women's earth-based bookstore. And they were all like, oh, you mean a witch store? Are you a pagan? And they all knew exactly what I was talking about. So we spoke a little bit and they would ask some questions. And my mom said, yeah, that's what the book that I took out of the library was. And I just looked at her and she goes, yeah, I took a book out of the library to read so I would have an idea. And I'm like, so you would read a book and believe a book more than having a conversation with me. But luckily it was, I don't even remember what book it was, but it was a book that explained.
It was a better book.
Yes, we don't know what was done traditionally, historically, for sure, but from archaeological evidence, we can suspect this is how these were celebrated, and this is what modern paganism is now. So at least she got a good book.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
I used to pass around, there was a book called The Truth About Witchcraft Today by Scott Cunningham. It was a little very small little paperback novel. Someone could sit and read in an evening or less.
I think I actually had brought that with me to Winnipeg on that trip for her.
Great little book. I used to pass that around to people a lot. Just here, have a gander at this. I can talk till I'm blue, but maybe you'd like to look at it yourself. That was a very useful little book. I don't even know if it's even in print these days.
Yeah.
Has anybody here ever really faced, you did, Gwen, you had that very unpleasant in the prison and the guards and I don't talk to Satanists and all that.
Yeah.
I had somebody where I was working wouldn't sit near me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They were Jehovah's Witness and they weren't coming near me at all, which is weird because I had a conversation with her once. And, in the Jehovah's Witness, they don't celebrate Christmas and this and this and this because they know it's pagan. All of those things. And that's specifically why they don't celebrate it. I said, well, she says, how can you do it when you know it's pagan? I said, well, I'm the person who's supposed to be celebrating it that way. It was very, very interesting. I've had Mormons come to the door and I say, no, I'm sorry, I'm a witch. Thank you very much. I have my own faith. They thought I was calling myself a bitch. Well, why would you call yourself a witch? Because they mean, like that old, oh, she's such a witch, meaning a bitch. I said, no, a witch, a pagan, on and on. And they were very confused, these lovely young men. When the Jehovah Witnesses come to the door, they say, no, I'm a witch. Oh, are you a Wiccan? Jehovah Witnesses know exactly who you are.
Yeah.
But the Mormons were completely oblivious. But the Jehovah's, that was different.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
I remember, Brian, back when in the first few years that I knew you, you actually had an employer that allowed you to choose your statutory holiday and you had Yule off.
I did, yeah.
Wow.
I remember that.
When I worked for Home Outfitters, our boss was super open, and it kind of helped that our HR was a pagan.
Oh.
Basically, when you signed up, they asked what stat holidays you do, and that's what you got paid for. I didn't get paid for Christmas, but I got paid for Yule.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's very interesting, because that's one thing I will admit would have been nice over the years to have May Day off.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I was home with my child for many years and had other children in the house. But when I was out of the home, before and now working, it would be nice to have my holidays off. Why? That would be nice.
Yeah. Now that was like 15 years ago, and Home Outfitters doesn't really exist anymore, but it was nice.
That's very fortunate, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much for listening. Certainly, anybody, you can send us any questions to our Facebook page, The Three Witches and a Druid. We're always happy to hear from people. And I would like to wish everybody a happy and safe holiday season. I know it might not be what we're all going to be expecting from other years, but everyone hang in there and do your best. And until next time, merry meet.
Merry part.
Merry meet again.
Blessed be.
This has been Three Witches and a Druid podcast. Thanks for listening.